This is Robert Sapolsky, and you're listening to Father-Offspring Interviews.
Hi, folks. Happy almost Thanksgiving, and welcome back to Father-Offspring Interviews. Our first question today is from Kathy from Nicaragua, who says, from an evolutionary standpoint, does choosing a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle go against our biological instincts, or is it a natural extension of human adaptability?
This brings us into one of the famous domains of people who think about this sort of stuff, which is the notion that people way back when knew exactly what we should be doing, the wisdom of the ancients, which is a variant on wisdom of the animals or wisdom of the children or wisdom of the elderly, wisdom of the ancients. Did humans back during the Paleolithic era, did they have things completely figured out? And thus, should we now be eating a paleo diet? Are we meant to be? Is it instinctual for us? Have we evolved to eat a certain sort of diet over others? So that's the question. When you look at humans closely, the first thing that becomes obvious is we've got carnivore written all over us. For starters, look at our teeth. We've got incisors that are fairly sharp. We've got canines that wouldn't rival a baboon or a lion, but nonetheless are sharper and more exaggerated than you see in herbivores. We also have a gut, a large intestines, which appears to be very appropriate for a carnivore. Specifically, it tends to be shorter in humans than you find in your average herbivore. What's the advantage of a shorter digestive tract, a shorter gut? Food moves through more quickly. Meat, rotting meat, this is less time for bacteria in your gut to divide and run wild and such. A habit of carnivores, a characteristic of carnivores, is having a shortened digestive tract to get stuff through quickly, and we have a shorter one than you see in typical herbivores. What else? What else? We have stomachs which release lots of hydrochloric acid, lots of stomach acid, perfect for breaking down tough muscle meat stuff. Moreover, we have a particularly wide range of these enzymes that break down meat, that break down protein, called proteases. We've got far more of them than you see in herbivores. Then there's another convenient thing about us that has carnivore written all over it, which is humans evolved the musculature that we could do a very particular, very effective type of hunting, which is we can walk tremendous distances. We walk into a field and an animal to the other end freaks out and runs to the next field. And we walk over to the next field and it does the same. And we follow them and we follow them. And classically observed in various hunter-gatherer groups, you walk your prey to death. You just keep walking at them for hours and hours until they are exhausted, collapsed, and then you have your prey. And the human ability to do this sort of hunting is unique and pretty adaptive with us. Okay, what else? We appear to not only be perfectly designed to be carnivores, but to be scavengers as well, which is that we have lots and lots of stomach acids in the range that are good for breaking down really fetid, rotten, infectious stuff from some dead thing that's been sitting around for a long time. Humans, both hunters and scavengers. Now, this brings up the opportunity at long last in this series to talk about crocodiles and something about their digestive tracts, because crocodiles do something that is amazing and totally disgusting. Crocodiles, say in East Africa, the crocodiles that used to live in my neighborhood there, during the peak migratory season of wildebeest, the crocs would be in a river near me with something called the Mara River, which at some point the entire wildebeest and zebra herd had to cross, and the crocs go crazy at that point, dragging down wildebeest and zebras left and right, killing lots of them, killing 0.1% of the herd, a herd of 1 million animals. So this is a lot of dead meat sitting around afterward. And crocodiles had more meat there than they can consume. What do? They pull the carcass underwater to an underground cave where they deposit the body. And a week later, a month later, 3 months later, when they feel like going through the leftovers, they pull out this carcass and then eat it. This carcass that's been rotting turgidly inside this underwater cavern for months and months. First off, how did people find this out? Here's the stuff of nightmares. This was a zoologist some decades ago who was in the water somewhere around there and got grabbed by a croc, bitten, injured. He passed out. And fortunately, the croc decided this is somebody to save for a few weeks from now and pushed him into his cave rather than kill him. And fortunately for him, the human, there happened to be a bubble of air up at the top of the cave that he bobbed up to. And somewhere later, he wakes up in absolute pitch black darkness and water, injured and pain, with all of these bloated wildebeest bodies floating near him. And he figured out where he was. And he figured out what I have to do now is dive down and fight my way through these wildebeest carcasses and come out the mouth of the cave and get to the surface and swim to the shore, hopefully before a croc grabs me. So this turns out to be what they do. And they've got this problem, which is they're now eating meat that's been rotting for 3 months. Crocodiles have like 10 times the acid level in their stomachs that you find in any other species. They break down everything so it doesn't get them sick. And I got to observe this once, and it was royally disgusting. I was by this river, and there were some crocs there, and this was about a month after the wildebeest migration, so there wasn't any fresh wildebeest. And there's some croc there on the surface and disappears for a while. And suddenly he comes back with a wildebeest carcass from somewhere down there. This huge, bloated carcass, which I've never seen anything like this. And then just to top it all off, he bit into it and the carcass exploded from all of the gases in there. And stuff spattered all over the river's edge, which fortunately I was not that close to, and the smell was unbelievable. So that's how crocs go about digesting rotten food. Point here. When you look at all sorts of aspects of our physiology and anatomy, it's obvious we were meant to be meat eaters. So now you look at us with a different perspective, and what you see is it's obvious we were meant to be herbivores, starting off with the teeth. Yeah, we got the incisors and the canines, but we've got these massive molars and premolars in the back. What are they good for? Not for cutting meat. They're good for smashing and grinding plant material. And we've got bigger molars with a bigger surface area than you find in your typical carnivore. Huh. Amid us having a shorter gut than you find in typical herbivores, we've got a longer gut than you find in typical carnivores. So that's interesting. Then we've got high levels of enzymes for digesting sugars, sucrases, lactase for breaking down dairy products. And all of that begins to suggest not a classic meat eater. But then you see something else. Lots of plants try to keep herbivores from eating them by growing all sorts of toxins in the plants. Eat me, you're going to be poisoned. And here I'm a brightly colored whatever, so you could know I have one of those poisons. Don't eat me. And it turns out most plant toxins are in minute levels because they're trying to discourage little rodent things eating them or little insect things. And we come along, we're pretty good at being able to eat plants that contain lots of toxins. So that's good. What else? We're also sedentary by now. And what you do with that is you store grains and all sorts of plants that contain toxins. The toxins break down over time, so they become edible. Now, the thing that really has herbivore written all over us has to do with this enzyme amylase. Amylase breaks down starch. We've got two different types of amylases coded for by two different genes, one of them expressed in the pancreas, the other expressed in our saliva. And the really interesting stuff is going on with the salivary amylase gene. You look at your average animal out there, including carnivores, and they've got a gene for salivary amylase. Because if you're eating some other animal, they may have some starch in them, glycogen or something. So you need this enzyme while you're eating them. Everybody's got salivary amylase and the gene that codes for it. And then you look at herbivores, and they've got a whole lot more copies of it. Something called gene duplication. The amylase, salivary amylase gene underwent duplication in herbivores so that they've got 4, 5, 6 copies of it. And you look at us, and we've got 20 copies. We are amazing starch digesters. When are we eating so much starch? After we invented agriculture. That's where you see this huge duplication of the salivary amylase gene in humans. Prior to that, we had 5 or 6 copies, basic run-of-the-mill herbivore. Neanderthals had 5 or 6 copies. The other human species that was alive until about 40 years ago, the Denisovans in Asia, sort of the equivalent of Neanderthals, they had 5 or 6 copies. Once we invented agriculture, we became major starch digesters. Interesting thing, animals that live around us became major starch digesters also. Rats, mice have lots and lots of copies of this genes. Chickens do as well. Pigs do as well because they're eating human stuff, as do cats, as do dogs. And particularly interesting with dogs is it depends on which breed. You look at dog breeds that have mostly been bred for hunting, retrievers, pointers, things of that sort. And they got, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 copies of this amylase gene. You look at farm dog breeds that are meant to keep marauding coyotes out. And what you see in them is they've got a lot more copies, 6, 7, 8 or so. They have evolved to also be hanging out around humans who eat very starchy food, farmers. Okay, so we got something mighty confusing here, which is we sure look like a carnivore, just on the edge of the properties you see in a carnivore, less carnivore-ish than other carnivores. And we sure look like herbivores, not dramatically herbivore-ish, but more so than you see in car. We're in between. And this brings in a classic concept for us as humans. We are generalists. We are not classic carnivores. We are not classic herbivores. Even back when, before we invented agriculture, we were a little bit of both. We were generalists, and we're generalist carnivores. We can kill stuff. We can eat dead stuff already. We are generalized herbivores. We forage, we grow stuff. We're somewhere in between. This is a classic theme with us, something we've touched on before. We are not a classic pair bonding species. We are not a classic polygamous tournament species. We're somewhere about halfway in between in terms of our reproductive systems. We are generalists. In terms of our geographic distribution, we are generalists. In terms of our guts, we are generalists. What does this tell us about the digestive systems that we humans have evolved? We've evolved ones that were meant to free us from genetic determinism, because we got all the bits and pieces to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, wind up being up in the Arctic, you're going to be eating a lot of whale blubber, wind up being in the Kalahari, you're mostly going to be subsisting on roots and tubers and everything in between. We have evolved to be generalists. And what being a generalist usually means is you are not strictly dictated by your genes. You got a lot of wiggle room.
Next, Maria from Barcelona says, I'm curious about fertility figures, particularly the Venus of Willendorf, dated back 30,000 years. I saw it again today, and it struck me as fairly realistic, the location and weight of adiposity. Is it possible that ancient people imagined such a body type, or perhaps someone managed to eat so many calories?
This is a great question at the intersection of some of our recent themes of obesity, anorexia, paleontology of humans, all of that. We've got the Venus of Willendorf. So as you can see, it's about 4.5 inches high. It's this amazing 30,000-year-old sculpture, which was found in Austria in 1908. And as described in the question, the most striking thing about it is it has very large breasts and very large truncal obesity and very large gluteal obesity. And of course, the issue becomes, what is this about? You will note also that Venus of Willendorf does not have a face. There's some weird thing going on top there. So it's an amazing piece of art. 30,000 years ago, someone managed to carve this, which is breathtaking. And what is it about? And when you look at the literature, there's some ridiculous, absurd, asinine ideas as to what it's about. I saw one paper where the authors were speculating that obviously this was a very lifelike sculpture of somebody back when who had polycystic ovarian disease. That seems a little unlikely, especially since, as we can see in the next picture, there's all sorts of figurines like this that popped up during that period throughout Eurasia. Probably not a pandemic of polycystic ovarian disease. The next, what I thought was silly theory, was this was obviously carved by a woman looking down at herself, and this is a point of view sculpting of what she sees. Now, this is kind of plausible, except for two things. One is, but how is she seeing the big butt back there? And the other is, no face. Couldn't she just go over to a stream and look in there and realize that she has a face and just like everybody else does? So that's limited. Then you look at another possible silly scenario, which is, okay, this is a sculpture of a figurine with big breasts and lovely calipigian buttocks and no face. So it was obviously sculpted by some guy showing what he pays attention to. So that's another possibility. Finally, the silliest speculation that I saw was somebody, I kid you not, writing that this was sculpted to present a positive body image to women at the time concerning obesity, and that had a corollary which would validate eating as much as possible to put on lots of weight, because this was Europe during the Ice Age. And this paper made, I thought, a rather feeble attempt to look at the other similar figurines from around Eurasia during that period and argue that the hip to waist ratio varied as a function of how far away these people were from glaciers at the time. Hey, what's this thing most likely about? Exactly what was brought up in the question, which is this is a fertility figurine. It most resembles someone who is pregnant. And this is a fertility symbol, as in endless cultures over the centuries, over the millennia. And this appears to be a version of that. Okay, that's great. And you see the exact same, most plausible explanation when you see these ones from elsewhere in Eurasia, carved out of stone or out of ivory or out of bone or out of hardened mud. And they all kind of look like pregnant figurines. And it is fairly easy to imagine this is one sort of fetish symbol thing in the hopes of conceiving. That's great, except now there might be some people who would say, yeah, but this is a pretty dramatically exaggerated version of what pregnancy might look like. It's art. It's art. Artists are allowed to exaggerate stuff. In fact, for purposes, Michelangelo's David, his right hand is way bigger than it should be, and it's meant to the strength, his hand, his powerful hand, whatever. Yeah, this seems like what's likely to go on. And one paper I saw on the subject speculated in a way that I think is pretty obvious. They said this exaggerated figurine probably reflects likely artistic choices. So I think that's what's going on with this figurine.
Forget Michelangelo's David. What about the many limbs of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man? Finally, we will touch on a topic that a number of people have asked about, such as Joanna from Portugal and Natasha from Oregon, summed up with the question, is there any neurobiological explanation for near-death experiences?
Well, in the face of a number of questioners bringing up the subject, I have assiduously avoided this like the plague. Am I out of my mind? Fools rush in to take this on. There's actually kind of interesting stuff going on there with that. And this was an education for me because I have resolutely refused to learn about the subject up until a few days ago. So, near death experiences, individuals who almost die, individuals who actually do die and are brought back from cardiac arrest, where their brain flatlines. There's no longer any activity in there shown with an EEG, and circumstances where you save the person, you get the heart beating again, the brain is reperfused with oxygen, and they survive. And what is seen is a lot of these people describe experiences, sensations, states of mind during this period when they were dying, cardiac arrest, their heart was not beating, no blood was getting to their brain, or when they were flatlining, near death experiences. Right off the bat, what we can virtually guarantee is there's a lot of nonsensical pseudo research that's been done in this area with religious connotations and spiritual connotations, and cutting through the chaff takes some work to look at people who, following all the Science 101 rules of objectivity, have done research on it. So, what are some of the common themes that people report after they have been brought back from near death or death? What do they describe? First off, consistently, there's a sense of dissolution of your body, detachment from your body, detachment from yourself, detachment from your ego, a sense of warmth, clarity, pleasure, happiness, belongingness, joy. That's often described. What else? Often a sense where there's a review of some of the events in your life and you feel great acceptance of it. You see dead loved ones. And here's the stereotypical one, you see a light that you feel yourself pulled towards, and what is often accompanying that is a sense that you want to just go into it and you feel those damn doctors getting you back alive again, and you don't want to return, but you feel some sort of obligation to your living loved ones. Okay, so across lots of studies and lots of different versions of descriptions of some of these experiences, this is the flavor to the things that are reported most often. And one thing that you see is this tends to be viewed as a truly wonderful experience. People come out of it with a sense of peace, with a sense of acceptance and gratitude when it's accompanied by this. Most strikingly, what is seen in people in the aftermath, the months, the years afterward, is people lose their fear of death. So this was right around the point where reading all this stuff started to make me feel all agitated, and sublimating that into more science, more science. How common is this phenomenon? Well, the studies show most of the literature is on the cardiac arrest people. It was roughly 20 to 30, 35% of people wind up reporting a near-death experience that has a lot of these characteristics. Crucially, there's no relationship between people who are more likely to get these near-death experiences with deep religious feelings, with certain religious orientations, with certain ethnicities, geographic location. It's unrelated to it. It's not just that people of this religious tradition, people who have these beliefs about afterlives, wind up having these things. It's all across the board. Interestingly, you see the same thing in the horrifying world of pediatric near-death experiences after cardiac arrest. Thank God, far less frequent, but about 20–30% of kids report similar things afterward. Okay, what's also clear is it's possible to induce near-death-like experiences in some individuals. Yes, all sorts of drugs that people take recreationally or otherwise, and they report some of the same. You leave your body, you feel unconnected with your corporeal self, feels great, you feel warm, there's that light once again, you put your life in order, you see your loved ones. So, okay, so lots of drugs can do that. Very interestingly, there's a phenomenon in fighter pilots, especially during training. One of the things that's done is they're taken way up 30,000, 50,000 feet or so. And this is during training where the rookie is sitting next to the instructor with dual controls. And one of the things that's done is at some point, the student takes off their oxygen mask and you see how many seconds they can still control the plane before they pass out. That tells you some interesting stuff. And what's seen is in about 10–15% of these cases, people report some of the same qualia, some of the same phenomena associated with near-death experiences. All right, so what's going on here? Broadly, there are three possibilities. First off, your soul exists and leaves your body for a while and does soul stuff, logical thing, and then it gets pulled back into you. And then you tell the grad students about this months later when they give you a questionnaire. I'm not going near that one. Second possibility, there is no actual experiences associated with that period of your heart no longer beating, coma, brain dead. And this is just psychological flailing in the aftermath to try to make sense of whatever it is you experience there, trying to pull something effable out of the ineffable, trying to pull something coherent, trying to pull something comforting, perhaps, in the aftermath of that. The third possibility, which I favor, of course, is physiologically, this is for real. This is a real phenomenon. So for people who are believing that it's for real, what are thought to be the triggers of this, that your brain produces these phenomena under those circumstances? Low oxygen, hypoxia, your heart isn't beating very well, not delivering much anoxia, your heart has completely stopped. Carbon dioxide levels build up like crazy. Hypercapnia is the term for it. There's just stuff going on there that is not normal for the brain. And neurons go and generate some unlikely experiences. Now, here's some, I think the official word would be, some very compelling scientific findings about this. And I took great comfort amid all the nonsensical studies that have wound up loosely in this literature of seeing the literature I'm about to describe come from scientists at University of Michigan, NYU, New York University, University of British Columbia, University of Louisville, a group in Belgium, all who have described and observed the exact same thing. In these studies, these are not people who were brought back from the dead. These are people who died. And these were people who had been on life support, and this was monitoring them with EEGs when the decision was made to take them off of life support. And they last for a few minutes, they last for 30 minutes, whatever, before they die. And what was observed by all of these investigators is within about 30 seconds of taking somebody off the machines, there is what is called an electroencephalographic surge. There's a surge of EEG activity in the brain starting after that. All sorts of neurons start firing in synchronized waves. And in a range that, for people who care about this stuff, are called gamma waves, waves that are occurring at a frequency roughly 30 to 50 waves per second or so. People know about gamma waves. What are they associated with? Working memory, attention, As you take somebody off the machines, very quickly, their brain is beginning to have the excitatory profile normally associated with attention. So this is right around the point where I got all unnerved by this again and lunged back into those papers to try to ignore the implications of that as well. This is what you see. As the person gets closer to dying, the gamma wave activity tends to increase. And then one of these groups, the Michigan group, then did a follow-up study showing the same thing when you do the equivalent to a lab rat. You get a burst of gamma waves. A dying rat in this way, its brain is producing brain waves associated with attention. Okay, this is all very unsettling. But now we get into the most unsettling domain, which is not just near-death experiences, but a subset of people who have them, a third to a half or so, who have what are termed out-of-body experiences. They come out of their body, they go up to the ceiling, they look down at what was going on. This is a subset of individuals who describe this happening. So that's interesting. Why not? That goes along with the light that's pulling you towards it, and that's fine. But then, in a small subset of studies that come from credible people, people who were having these out of body experiences while they were floating around up on the ceiling were able to describe events while they were brain dead, while they were in cardiac arrest, describe events going on in the emergency room, corroborated by the physicians there. And this has been seen by scientists at University of Michigan and at NYU, where someone is able to identify a bit of conversation that was going on among the doctors working on this dead individual. Okay, this is very, very unsettling domain here. One amusing study sort of built on this, and this is a researcher, physician at NYU, Sam Parnia, who said, these rare cases where I get someone who brought back from the dead, not only had a near-death experience, but had an out-of-body one, and they were up on the ceiling looking at us, saving their life. And he had some wooden boards put up in the top of the emergency room there, a couple of feet down from the ceiling, where there were patterns and pictures on the part that could only be visible from someone up in the ceiling and not from down below. Did anybody who now described a near-death experience involving out-of-body up on the ceiling looking down at them, did anybody notice these pictures? No, nobody did. So make of that what you will. I have no way of explaining this. The possibility that people, when they are dead, when they are getting no oxygen anymore to their brain, when their heart has stopped, when their brain has ceased its electrical activity and are brought back from that, the fact that there are some stereotypical remembered experiences, which, big surprise, have some pretty emotional, lasting consequences, that's just fine. The possibility that this involves a sense of being outside your body and being able to observe what's going on, interesting subset of this rare experience. The possibility that at that time, the person is observing things and remembering things that could then be corroborated by the medical people as having occurred there when the person was brain dead or when the person had no heart function left. I don't know what to make of this. And the easy knee-jerk thing for me to say as a scientist, sort of totally unnerved by this, is let's do lots more research. And these are just a few examples, and let's get a lot more examples. And I don't know where this will lead, but this is a surprising literature. I don't have an explanation for it. It goes against everything I hold on to in my materialist, determinist, reductive, scientific Mr. Machine mind. Nonetheless, this has been reported at the level of anecdote by nonetheless some reliable medical experts as something that they've corroborated. So, near-death experiences.
And on that note, that is it for episode 88. I'm Offspring Share Sapolsky, and thanks for your continued support of science and the beard.